Barney and Betty Hill were an American couple who claimed they were abducted by extraterrestrials in a rural portion of the state of New Hampshire from September 19th to September 20th, 1961. It was the first widely publicized report of an alien abduction in the United States. The incident came to be called the Hill Abduction and the Zeta Reticuli Incident, because the couple stated they had been kidnapped by aliens who claimed to be from the Zeta Reticuli system. Their story was adapted into a best-selling 1966 book, The Interrupted Journey, and the 1975 television movie, The UFO Incident. In September 2016, plans were announced to make a film based on the events with an unknown release date. Most of Betty's notes, tapes, and other items have been placed in the permanent collection of the University of New Hampshire, her alma mater, in July 2011. The New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources marked the site of the alleged craft's first approach with the historical marker. The Hills lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker active in the local Unitarian congregation. The Hills were also members of the NAACP and community leaders, and Barney sat on the local board of the United States Commission of Civil Rights. They were an interracial couple at the time, when it was particularly uncommon in the United States. Barney was black and Betty was white. According to a variety of reports given by the Hills, the alleged UFO sighting happened on September 19, 1961, around 10:30 p.m. The Hills were driving back to Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal, just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire. Betty claimed to have observed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upward to the west of the moon, while Barney navigated US Route 3. Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star, only it moved upward. Since it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look, as well as walk their dog, Delzy. Barney stopped at a scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Betty, looking through binoculars, observed an odd-shaped craft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon. Because her sister had several years earlier said she had seen a flying saucer, Betty thought it might be what she was observing through binoculars. Barney observed what he reasoned was a commercial airliner traveling towards Vermont on its way to Montreal. However, he soon changed his mind because, without looking as if he had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction. This observation caused Barney to realize this object that was a plane was not a plane. They quickly returned to the car and drove towards Francona Notch, a narrow mountainous stretch of the road. The Hills claimed that they continued driving on the isolated road, moving very slowly through Franconia Notch in order to observe the object as it came very close. At one point, the object passed above a restaurant and a signal tower on the top of Cannon Mountain and came out near the Old Man of the Mountain. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of a granite cliff profile, which was 40 feet long, and that it seemed to be rotating. The couple watched as the silent, illuminated craft moved erratically and bounced back and forth in the night sky. Approximately 1 mile south of Indian Head, they said, the object rapidly descended towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered approximately 80 to 100 feet above the hills. 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. It reminded Barney of a huge pancake. Carrying his pistol in his pocket, he stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object. Using binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen about 8 to 11 humanoid figures who were peering out of the craft's windows, seemingly looking at him. In unison, all but one figure moved to what happened to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message telling him to stay where you are and keep looking. Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be the bat wing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and a long structure descended from the bottom of the craft. The silent craft approached of what Barney estimated was within 50 to 80 feet overhead and 300 feet away from him. On October 21st, 1961, Barney reported to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, investigator Walter Webb, that the beings were somehow not human. Barney tore the binoculars away from his eyes and ran back to his car. In a near hysterical state, he told Betty, "They're not going to capture us." He saw the object again shift its location to directly above the vehicle. He drove away at high speed, telling Betty to look for the object. She rolled down the window and looked up. Almost immediately, the hills heard a rhythmic series of beeping and buzzing sounds, which they seemed to bounce off the trunk of their vehicle. The car vibrated, and a tingling sensation passed through the hills' bodies. The hills said that they experienced the onset of an altered state of consciousness that left their minds dull. A second series of beeping or buzzing sounds returned the couple to full consciousness. They found that they traveled nearly 35 miles south, but had only vague, spotty memories of this section of the road. They recalled making a sudden, sharp, unplanned turn, encountering a roadblock, and observing a fiery orb in the road. Arriving home at about dawn, the Hills assert that they had some odd sensations and impulses that they could not readily explain. Betty insisted their luggage be kept near the back door rather than in the main part of the house. Their watches would never work again. Barney said that the leather strap on the binoculars were torn, though he could not recall it tearing. The toes of his best dressed shoes were scrapped. Barney says that he was compelled to explain his genitals in the bathroom, though he found nothing unusual. They took long showers to remove possible contamination, and each drew a picture of what they had observed. Perplexed, the Hills said they tried to reconstruct the chronology of events that witnessed the UFO and drove home, but immediately after they heard the buzzing sounds, their memories became incomplete and fragmented. After sleeping for a few hours, Betty woke and placed the shoes and clothing she had wore during the drive into her closet, observing that the dress was torn at the hem, zipper, and lining. Later, when she retrieved the items from her closet, she noticed a pinkish powder on her dress. She hung the dress with her clothesline and the pink powder blew away. But the dress was irreplaceably damaged. She threw it away, and then changed her mind, retrieved the dress, and hung it in her closet, Over the years, 5 laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analysis on the dress. They were shiny, concentric circles on the car's trunks that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with the compass. Not only that, when they moved it close to the spots, the needles will whirl rapidly, but when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. On September 21st, Betty telephoned Peace Air Force Base to report a UFO encounter. Though the fear of being labeled eccentric, she withheld some of the details. On September 22nd, Major Paul W. Henderson telephoned the Hills for a more detailed interview. Henderson's report, dated September 26, determined that the Hills had probably misidentified the planet Jupiter. This was later changed to an optical condition, inversion, and insufficient data. Report 100-1-61 Air Intelligence Information Record. His report was forwarded to Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's UFO research project. Within days of the encounter, Betty borrowed the UFO book from a local library. It had been written by an retired Marine Corps Major, Donald E. Keyhole, who was also the head of the NICAP, a civilian UFO researcher. On September 26, Betty wrote to Keyhole. She related the full story, including the details about the humanoid figures that Barney had observed through binoculars. Betty wrote that she and Barney had considered hypnosis to help recall what had happened. Her letter was eventually passed on to Walter M. Webb, a Boston astronomer and an NICAP member. Webb met with the Hills on October 21, 1961, in a 6-hour interview. The Hills related all they could remember of the UFO encounter. Barney asserted that they had developed a sort of mental block, and that the suspected there were some portions of the event that he did not wish to remember. He described in detail that he could remember about the craft and the appearance of the somehow not human figures aboard the craft. Webb stated that they were telling the truth and the incident probably occurred exactly as reported, except for some minor uncertainties and technicalities that might be tolerated in such observations where human judgment is involved, i.e., exact time, length of visibility, apparent sizes of object and occupants, distance, height of objects, etc. 10 days after the alleged UFO encounter, Betty began having series of vivid dreams. They continued for 5 successful nights. Never in her memory she had recalled dreams in such detail and intensity, but they stopped abruptly after 5 nights and never returned. They occupied her thoughts during the day. When she mentioned them to Barney, he was sympathetic, but not too concerned, and the matter was dropped. Betty did not mention them to Barney again. In November 1961, Betty began writing down the details of her dreams. In one dream, she and Barney encountered a roadblock and men who surrounded their car. She lost consciousness but struggled to regain it, and she realized that she was being forced by 2 small men in front of a forest that night, and of seeing Barney walking behind her. Though she had not called to him, she seemed to be in trance or sleepwalking. The men stood about 5 feet to about 5 feet 4 inches tall, and wore matching blue uniforms with caps similar to those worn by military cadets. They appeared nearly human, with black hair, dark eyes, prominent noses, and bluish lips. Their skin was a grayish color. In the dreams, Benny, Barney, and the men walked up a ramp into a dish-shaped craft of metallic appearance. Once inside, Barney and Betty were separated. She protested and was told by a man she called the leader that if she and Barney were examined together, it would take much longer to conduct the exams. She and Barney were taken to separate rooms. Betty then dreamt that a new man, similar to the others, entered the conduct with her exam with the leader. Betty called this new man the examiner and said he had a pleasant, calm manner. The leader and the examiner spoke to her in English. The examiner's command of that language seemed imperfect, and she had difficulty understanding him. The examiner told Betty that he would conduct a few tests to note the differences between humans and craft's occupants. He seated her on a chair, and a bright light was shone on her. The man cut off a lock of Betty's hair. He examined her eyes, ears, mouth, teeth, throat, and hands. He saved trimmings of her fingernails. After examining her legs and her feet, the man used a dull knife similar to a letter opener to scrape some of her skin onto a resembled cellophane. He then tested her nervous system, and he thrust a needle into her navel, which caused Betty agonizing pain, whereupon the leader waved his hand in front of her eyes and the pain vanished. The examiner left the room, and Betty engaged in conversation with the leader. She picked up a book with rows of strange symbols that the leader said she could take home with her. She also asked from where he came, and he pulled down an instructional map dotted with stars. In Betty's dream account, the man began extorting the hills from the ship when a disagreement broke out. The leader then informed Betty that she couldn't keep the book, stating that they had decided that the other men did not want her to even remember the encounter. Betty insisted that no matter what they did to her memory, she would one day recall the events. She and Barney were taken to the car, where the leader suggested that they wait to watch the craft's departure. They did so, then resumed their drive. On November 25th, 1961, the Hills were again interviewed at length by NICAP members, this time C.D. Jackson and Robert E. Holman. Although the Hills noted that they arrived home later than anticipated, the drive should have taken about 4 hours. They claimed not to have realized that they have arrived home 7 hours after the departure from the coal brook. When Holman and Jackson noted that the discrepancy of the Hills, the couple had no explanation, a phenomenon UFOologists call missing time. The Hills claim to recall almost nothing of the 35 miles of Route 3 between Lincoln, Indian Head, and Ashland. Both claim to recall an image of a fiery orb sitting on the ground. Betty and Barney reasoned that it must have been the moon, but Holman and Jackson informed them that the moon had set earlier in the evening. The subject of a hypnosis was suggested in order to elicit previous irretrievable memories. Barney was apprehensive, but thought it might help Betty to put to rest what Barney described as the nonsense about her dreams. By February 1962, the Hills were making frequent weekend drives to the White Mountains, hoping to revisit the site might spark more memories. They were unsuccessful in trying to locate the site where recalled seeing a fiery orb sitting in the road. However, they were able to eliminate several possible routes. They found what they claimed was the capture site on Labor Day weekend in 1965. Hey guys, this is the end of part 1. Part 2 will be back next week. If you like this podcast and love stories of the mysterious and supernatural, let us know on Instagram and Facebook under Dopish Media. And if you have any ideas for a story, also send us a direct message. We would love to get ideas as well. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.